Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's call for the Device Management Interface Brigade. Thanks for joining. As usual, the call is recorded and will be shared on YouTube, so please be mindful of whatever comments and thoughts you share. Today, I want to start with a review of the documentation that Amit put together in the past week, and where it lay, especially around the image update. So, Meet, do you want to give us some thoughts about this?
Yeah, sure. Andre. Yeah, we did update this documentation about the software image management, right? So, you can see we have the message sequences, and as we discussed in last week's meeting, that the image status, which basically says what is the status of the RPC, right? So this holds for the download image, activate image, and revert to standby image APIs, right? So this would be going back to as a return result of the gRPC, as well as an event onto the Kafka bus, and that has been depicted in this pictorially in this page. If you come down, and I also have added some text down there which touches upon some of the things that we did discuss within this brigade. So one of them is this activate image RPC, which had quite a bit of discussions, right? So basically here, one thing that we are talking about is that once you activate an image, right? So this image has to be something which is in the standby partition. This will trigger a reboot of the device, right? And after the boot from the new image, some tests are expected to run to validate if this activation of this image is successful or not. If it is successful, if this validation passes, right, then only the image is committed. Else, it should roll back in the sense that it should just boot the image from the old, boot the device from the old image. Right. Now, what those tests could be and how they are run is up to the implementation of the device manager and the OLT, right? So whether those tests are run in the device manager itself or coordinated by the device manager, or the device manager offloads it completely to the device, is totally up to the device and the device manager implementation. So this is one important topic which got discussed a lot, and this is especially important for in-band managed devices, because in the worst case, if an image could not be activated and it fails at a stage where even the in-band management is not yet established, then basically we lose complete control of the device from the pod. So this automatic rollback is pretty important, especially important for in-band managed devices. And also the other point that was captured in last week's meeting was to talk a little bit on how this ties with Volta. And that is what I've captured in the last paragraph, saying that what Volta sees is just a reboot of OLT, right? And nothing more. And so as long as the image upgrade procedure, right, leaves the device in such a state where if at all any persistent configuration in the OLT was done, right, that had to be copied. If that happens, then things would work seamlessly with Volta. Volta would just say, okay, the device is rebooted. Now it doesn't care whether it is working from an old image or a new image, as long as it has all the configuration that was pushed earlier. Yeah, that's more or less what we updated in the documentation. So anyways, I would
There was if I recall correctly, I mean, there was also a discussion that I want everybody to be aware of. That is that you should not call revert to standby without the verification checks, because in theory one could do a download and then call a revert to standby and get that image passed on the active partition without get that image active without passing to the activate image RPC. That is the wrong way to do it, and we just discussed to put a disclaimer on it that in order for it not to be used in that way, because that is gives no assurance, I guess, of things going in the proper direction. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So thanks for bringing that up as well, Andrea. So the revert to standby basically, as Andrea said, right, is basically an RTC which gives a lot of power to the operator, saying that okay, just bring the OLT up with the image that is there in the standby partition. So it is more like a force, right? And as such, it would not run the same activation checks that are done with the activate image RPC. So this is something where this is something that the operator would want to use when things are not working. Maybe the activation checks are failing because of some other reason. So the expectation is that, or the assumption is that the image on the standby, when you do revert to standby, is a good working version. Right? And also the implementations can make that a little bit more stronger by ensuring that when this revert to standby is called, that the image on the standby is a committed version. If it is not yet a committed version, it could either give an error or at least warn the operator saying that, are you sure you want to do this?
Yeah, I think the only problem I see here is that I think at least for our devices, the committed one is always the one on the active standby, active partition, and not on the download partition. So I think we're not keeping that information in the device that it was committed before. So it could be perhaps done by the device manager.
Yeah, so
but then perhaps
so the combination of the device plus the device manager need to be able to support this concept. So yeah, if the device itself does not do it, then we could use a persistent storage on the device manager to store that information.
Perfect. That's great. I know there was another discussion that I want to bring up about the name versus UID in the stop managing device, and that brought up we brought up partially the more general discussion on what to use in terms of the API. Basically, here, not here. Sorry. No, not this one. Sorry. Yeah.
No, so Andrea, that is not yet merged, so I don't think you'll see it here, right?
Yeah, but the
stop get there.
So the start is here, and what we discussed last week was to have a stop managing device. The doubt that arose during this week is what do you pass as an argument in there? Because if you pass the name of the device, that incurs the problem of being a changeable component, read-write element. even though it doesn't make a lot of sense for us, but it is that in the RFC. The problem of passing the UUID to the stop one is that we have said that the UUID is generated out of some information from the device, such as the serial number. And that's if somebody cannot reach the device, there is no way the serial number can be seeded to the UUID generation to have that unique UUID generated out of that. So it will not be returned properly in the start managing device. And thus, you cannot really have it as a parameter of the stop managing device. Holger, do you want to bring everybody up to speed on what we discussed?
Yeah, so put in another way, basically, we are asking the question that how do we stop a device, or how do we call a stop managing device API before the start managing device has returned, right? Because the start managing device API is going to return the UUID for the device. And there could be use cases for that. And Holger, you might add more to that. One is, say, we're not able to reach that device at that point of time when the start managing device is called. Maybe the IP address that has been passed is a wrong one, or actually that the device is not powered on, right? It's going to be powered on later on. So, use cases of that sort. And if the operator realizes that, okay, something was wrong and he wants to stop or basically cancel that start managing device RPC, right? So the thing would be to call stop managing device, but because the start did not return, so we don't yet have the UUID. So using the UUID does not seem a possibility if the UUID is generated by the device manager, which is the current proposal. So the other two things that came up was, one was to use the name of the device, which was passed in the start, in the stop as well. And this has an advantage that the start and stop are more symmetrical, and in both of them we pass the name. Or the other option is that as soon as the start is fired, right, it returns a transaction ID kind of a thing through which the stop can be pushed. Right? So the stop could take a union of either a transaction ID or a UUID. So if you have the UUID, you could pass that in the stop. Or if you don't have the UUID yet, and if you have the transaction ID for the start, you could pass that as well. And using that, you could cancel the start RPC or ask it to be stopped. So this is what we discussed. And we want feedback from this Brigade as to if either of these two options sounds good, or if there are other thoughts. Holger, you could add if I missed something, or
no, you actually captured it very well, so I don't have anything to add here. Thanks.
Okay.
Anybody has any thoughts? What would be a preferred possibility? Because at the moment, what we do on the Volta side is that
again, I unfortunately wasn't able to follow much of the conversation thanks to Zscaler and our IT department trashing my network connection. I'll have to catch up on this offline, I guess. I don't want to comment without the whole conversation being heard.
that's fine, David. Thanks. My thought is, I'm fine using the name under the assumption that is a read-only thing. It's a one-time set at the beginning from the start managing RPC, and then it's a one-time. It just, if you change it, you get into an inconsistent state, and you're done. The transaction ID option is a very good one, although it introduces yet another parameter, which you need to keep track of. It's just simply annoying. So I will go for the name. A third option that we discussed was giving it some parameters from the outside. Let's take the serial number, for example. The operator usually knows the serial number beforehand, and its inventory system knows that serial number. So it could pass the serial number down to the device manager, and that device manager could create the UID based out of that seed. Although I don't know if that is a valid thing to do, or is it even possible?
So, Andreas, on this, maybe in most cases, operator would know the serial number, but I wouldn't think that that's a mandatory requirement, right? Even if you have one case where the operator does not know the serial number, and say it is looking up to the device manager to really learn the serial number, maybe it knows some other identity of the device, right? And specifically not the serial number. So then I think then we might have a problem there.
That makes sense. Okay, let's give it a few more days for people to think about it. I'm probably tending towards the name, but let's see what other people think. And if there are any suggestions and thoughts, you can easily put them on the channel or write to Amit directly on Slack. I mean, if you have a patch ready with your thoughts, Amit, you might as well push it up. And
okay.
we can also discuss there. Maybe seeing the proto files helps in that sense.
Yeah. So okay. So what I'll do is I'll put out a patch with the first option, that is using the name, right?
Okay.
And yeah, whatever discussion happens as part of that patch set, we'll continue on that.
That sounds great to me.
Okay, perfect. Okay, there is, before we go into the Jira review, there's something that, since Manuel's on the call, I wanted to clarify. A few weeks ago, on a call where Tuskin was present, there was a discussion around events and metrics on BMC and what exactly is the requirements of the operators for BMC. And I honestly didn't know what to tell him. Turk Telecom has not made a decision on the BMC yet. So for now, whatever interface we provide is going to be done through either Redfish on the EdgeCore OLT or some other stuff on any other type of OLT, probably thus not through BMC. Manuel, any thoughts on this?
So for the future, we would require a BMC, but not for the MVP. So use of BMC is intended for the future, but right now we don't need it for the MVP, or it's not strictly needed for the MVP. Yeah. Just right there for not a contingency for the MVP. Yeah.
Okay,
and so, I mean, I was not sure if that is actually a contingency for the design of this API and the implementation of it. My understanding was that no matter how the data hits the metal, whether it is via BMC or not, I thought the functions and the metrics and all of the things would be pretty much abstract or independently available from the hardware implementation. I think there's potential impact on the software upgrade that I understand, and on the authority or on the administrative capabilities that would be available via BMC. But I think the operations should be designed and implemented, or let's say implemented in terms of this API independently of the hardware. I'm not sure if there are other views where this would not make sense.
No, I tend to agree with that. With the fact that this becomes really a matter of implementation detail. I think the reason the discussion came up because BMC doesn't really support some of the stuff we are putting in the API, such as the events and the metrics. And thus it was like, what happens if the only thing you have with the device is BMC? And there I just said, let's see if that is the requirement, what is the status, and apparently it's not fundamental. And also my expectation is that it is one of the many ways of communicating with the device, and it might be together with something else that gives metrics and events. Does that sound fair?
Yeah, that is also my understanding. Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Perfect. So I would leave it as it's just another means of communicating with the API, with the device. The API shouldn't change because of it. And the important thing is that if something is not supported, we should return a gRPC error unsupported. And it can be from the same implementation of the device manager. If it's going through BMC because nothing else is available, most of the stuff will be unsupported. If it's going through some other type of communication, such as netconf, such as Redfish, most of it will be supported, so it will not return the error code. Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Manuel. I might take a note of this and document this. Okay. On the note of the receive power from the device manager, I have not talked with the folks at the Brigade because it's just there are more pressing issues such as the release of Volta 2.4 and the fixing of other bugs that they found. So I just hold on that. It's not like a very urgent issue, so we might as well hold on for a second on that and have a better discussion when the folks from that brigade are more free. Okay. Anything else on this point before we go forward? No? Okay, perfect. It's a little of a JIRA review. These are the things that are in progress or to do. So Amit is working on the device, the 3282. Amit is working on it. I know about that. I still have not done 3264 for the same reason that I was outlining before. I would like to tend to minimize the changes to the protos before the Volta 2.4 release. I know this is just comments, but as you know, avoid churn, avoid the possible issues, and just keep it at that. And don't create any problems on that side. 3283, Amit, I guess it comes with the discussion we had today. What are your plans on that one?
Yeah, I was waiting for some of these discussions to finish, but quite a few of those items that are mentioned in the JIRA are already addressed, but whatever is remaining, I'll do that. I'll work on that.
Perfect. Okay, it's good. I don't have anything else. I'll create a Jira ticket for the stuff that I have to do in here for documenting the BMC stuff. Perfect. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to hear from Olga that I know is implementing this interface. If there are any thoughts, any implementation challenges, anything that you found tricky while creating the code. I know that an API is as good as the code that implements it, because one can create a wonderful API, but then if the code is not able to, I guess, implement it properly, you get into a bad system. So I'd like to hear some of the feedback that you're having, Holger, and what the lessons for this group you have, anything that we might need to change.
Difficult question. So, I mean, we haven't done a complete implementation yet, so we are just have started doing it, and I haven't found anything which I found which is simply wrong, or I wouldn't do it this way. So I'm quite happy. So it's currently I don't see any real problems here. So I don't know. Perhaps I can give some more feedback at a later stage of the implementation.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Perfect according to me.
Yeah. And then I could also be perhaps a little bit more prepared to do that than right now.
Yeah, sorry to have put you on the spot, but I think
no, it's okay. It's totally fine. But yeah, so it's
I figure that being the early stages of both the design and the implementation might as well keep it very looped together in order for lessons to be learned and things to be understood properly, I guess, without the misunderstanding that could create holes in either the implementation or the API itself.
Yeah, for me, the whole thing with gRPC and protobufs is relatively new, so this was a challenge. I mean, it's not that complicated, but I mean, it's just getting your head around it. It's took some time, so this is totally fine. So, but actually, I have a question regarding this. Perhaps somebody can answer me this. As far as I understand Wartha, for example, an adapter is sending events to Kafka for metrics or alarms or something, and these are protobufs. But then someone is converting them to JSON to send it to the outside world. Is this correct? So you don't have a protobuf interface to consumers of metrics and alarms, which are outside of Wartha.
Yes, you are correct. There is this element which is called the Kafka exporter, which reads out of the Kafka bus and exposes elements to them with a JSON structure. Amit can give you more information. They've worked extensively on it, so I'll let him.
Okay, so yeah, thanks. But so the question is now for the device manager, is the Kafka interface, so is there also something expected to be north of it, which is doing the protobuf to JSON conversion if needed?
No, that would still be in the Kafka exporter. Just push it to the device manager should push stuff to Kafka according to the protobuf of this API, and then the Kafka exporter will take care of getting it and translating it to JSON. At least that is my understanding. Amit?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, and I think there's already work going on. The path set is already out there with the initial set of metrics which are expected from the device management interface being exported out to Prometheus by the Kafka topic exporter.
And so this also means that the system which is north of the device manager and which will consume these topics is actually, so there's always a Kafka exporter in between, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, great.
And that is, I think that is the best way to look at this, because it's the best way to approach a good, valid separation of concerns and allow the device manager to just push to Kafka, and after that, kind of forget about it, if you can pardon my word. You push to Kafka, and that's all you have to do. Somebody else will read from it and export it into a format that Prometheus and others understand.
Okay, no, that's totally fine for me. We just were not sure about doing the implementation, if we would have to do the JSON conversion ourselves, or, but this clarifies it. That's great. So you're actually sending a marshaled version of the data in some byte stream or so, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's what even Volta is doing, and that's what we are expecting the device managers to do as well.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah. And maybe I can actually put the patch in here. It's already up, right, Amit?
Yeah. You could look for, yeah, it's there, down there, you could see, Vol 3255.
Perfect. So if anybody wants to take a look at this, it's here. I'll have to review it because I have not spent any time on this. So I'll just put an action point on myself to do it. Okay. So that was all I had on the agenda for today. I think it was a good alignment on things, on where we are. Does anybody have any other topics that they want to bring up on today's call?
Yeah, Andreas. So one thing, yeah, I wanted to bring up. I think this was brought up earlier also. I don't remember who brought it up. Is regarding the management of logs on the device.
Management of logs on the device. Okay, I see.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't have any proposals or thoughts right now, but what the first question that we need to I think answer is this the right place to do the management of the logs on the device, or is this the right interface? Or because now we have two, right? One is through Volta, and this the device management interface. So should the management of logs on the device be done through this interface? That is only the management. And the other thing is, from a more generic perspective, how are the logs from the device made available to external systems, which could be very deployment dependent or operator dependent, but at least what are the thoughts, right? Or what are the possibilities? So I think two aspects, right? One is the management of the logs. The other is how do you make those available? So yeah, I would like to hear if anybody has any thoughts on this already. Then we could,
can the logs from the devices just be pushed to a syslog server? And the syslog servers, I mean, there's mechanisms to publish those to Elasticsearch, which is what the rest of the logs are going to right now for consolidation.
So, okay, so you're saying that to push it to a remote syslog server, right?
Yeah, is there any reason not to do that?
No, I wouldn't think so.
Because then they'd be automatically incorporated with the rest of the logs in the Elasticsearch if you used a adapter to that.
I guess then I'm totally fine with the syslog. I guess then that becomes the question on who exactly configures the device itself to push the logs to syslog. Is it the device manager or is it Volta, the Volta side?
I almost put it, I personally think leaning towards device manager. But that's just personal opinion.
May I chime in? Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I think one of the exceptions is the OpenOLT agent log, because we cannot send it to the syslog right now. So is it in the scope of this device management log manager or management subtopic, or we should handle the OpenOLT agent or send it through another channel to somewhere?
Well, that is a good question. I think that would be a topic for discussion with Girish at least and other parts. I would be
Yeah.
I would be fine pushing those also to syslog to have a device generic log that it captures everything. But I don't know, that's just a personal thought.
And another question is to adjust the log levels of these two elements. You know, one is the bulk core, the device management daemon, whose logs are redirected to the syslog right now, but we cannot do this for OpenOLT agent logs. And these two logs are set, the levels of these two logs are set separately in separate ways. So I think we should also talk about setting the log levels of these two logs, right? Through some mechanism, or through, for example, gRPC proto, where we can set the log levels through, you know, through directly the agent inside the agent, but no other way.
But
So Volta today leverages etcd and watches on etcd for config changes for logs.
Yeah.
If the agent chooses and has that capability, it can do that as well, as, to be honest, could the device. But then it creates a dependency on etcd for log setting.
Yeah. Maybe adapter will look at the etcd and then say the log level to the OpenOLT agent on that level.
I almost when I'm debugging or troubleshooting, might the operator want to be able to set the log level only on the agent and not on the adapter? And might they, I guess, almost directly connect via device management API or CLI or whatever to do that? I guess the question is, do they really, when I'm troubleshooting, I may have lost connectivity to Volta. So only being able to set the log levels through Volta, I would think would be a troubleshooting concern.
I'm still missing what's the suggestion. Is the suggestion to set everything, even the OpenOLT level logs, through this, or we keep them separate? I would be for keeping them separate because the OpenOLT is really on the network side, on the control side, while this is more management side. And I see the value of keeping them separate.
If you're suggesting setting the OpenOLT agent as well as the other OLT logs via OLT commands directly on the OLT, I'm kind of supportive of that separation too, if I understand you correctly.
Yeah, well, my idea is that the OpenOLT agent has its own mechanism of getting the logs to the level he wants, while the device manager might have a configuration for the chassis level logs or NLP platform logs and all of those that are unrelated to the PON side that the OpenOLT manages.
Yeah, I suspect I'd, for troubleshooting OLT, I'd want to SSH the OLT or get on the console port and be able to set the logs via some command on the OLT. Is kind of my intuition.
Okay, then maybe this is a topic for the whole TST at large and not just us, because I wouldn't venture on calling this myself. I'm making a decision, I guess.
Yeah, I would agree.
So what I can do is I can come up with at least some of my thoughts and at least summarize some of what we discussed here. And I can share the proposal next time on this call, or I can share the proposal on the mailing list and everything, and then we can either next week, Tuesday, but most likely the Tuesday after that, bring it up on TST and see what they think. Would that work for everybody?
Yep.
That sounds fine, yeah.
Yeah, sounds good to me too. But apologies, just one question. So since I was just on the phone for a moment, I might have missed the key direction. So with regards to an option to export to Fluent, so upstream systems for log collection, would that then go from the syslog or from the device manager? Was there a thought already spent on this?
No, there was, I think the agreement was to use, at least the agreement, the proposal, the discussion was to use syslog, and I would tend to agree because it's already a well-proven solution and platform and set of elements that work, and we would put less burden on the implementation of the device manager. The device manager would just possibly enable exporting of the logs to syslog or enable the syslog endpoint, something like that, and set the level for those logs that are definitely not managed by the OpenOLT. At least that is my thinking. But is anybody else more feel free to add?
This is also my understanding. So, I mean, I think I would also go for this log first, and things like putting logs in, for example, FluentD as well. I think this should be done by a different system outside of the device manager. And I think this is totally depending on the system or on the log concept you have in your system then. So it's so you're using Fluent, others will use something different. So it's I don't think that this is a task to do for the device manager. So the device manager is only configuring, as Andreas said, and then if there has to be some forwarding from this log to somewhere else, this is a different entity.
Okay, yeah, no, that is fine. The only thing I'm saying is I think the thought process should include the upstream system exported, whether it's an EFK stack or something else. I mean, that would be quite typical because we would envision the microservices, right, the containers being already included or integrated into such a logging collection, which is centralized, and the OLT logs should just end up they're in the same place. And of course, there's some liberty and some some flexibility on how those get actually into, for example, fluent bit also. But I believe it should be aligned with the idea that we have such a central collection in SIBA and Volta. So that is why I think, as Andrea has noted it, having an external upstream system, that would be already good to consider that, how that works.
Okay, that sounds good to me. Anything else?
Yeah. So just to make myself clear on this, right? So I think what we are saying is that we propose that the logs generating out of the OLTs go into syslog, right? And this interface could be used to manage that. For example, setting the IP address of the remote syslog server, right? Or the policies about how much of disk space to be used, or blah blah blah, right? Things like that. But are we okay saying that all the OLTs could actually generate logs via syslog? I think for the H core it is fine. As Holger confirms, I think it works for Hatron as well, but we don't know about other vendors.
I guess that would really be maybe their issue. No, maybe that's putting it a little too strong. But I would expect that each system, even a fairly small one, would need this capability. The other option is that if it is really, really impossible, what they could do is in their implementation of the device manager, they could import them within itself and push them to syslog. I wouldn't suggest that, but it's an internal implementation, I don't care. We won't have any API to directly read logs from the device manager. But if somebody is at the point where they cannot export to syslog, and we suggest syslog, it's software. There's always a way you can do it, I guess. Does that make sense? Or not? No?
Yeah, so it makes sense to me. So basically what I was trying to question is it okay for at least the group here saying that, syslog is the way we would want to go? Or do we have any other thoughts saying that, no, this is not what most of the OLTs use? But looks like I think everyone is fine with using syslog. And if there are cases where the devices can't directly write to a remote syslog server, then they have to come up with alternate adaptations for those. They could write it to their own whatever log consumers, and then from there they could take it to whatever way they would want. But the question would be that this interface would be really dependent on syslog, right? So the interface would assume that the device is managing its logs using syslog, and we would define the interface in that way. But if indeed the device is not doing that, then how would it work? Well, I don't know if I'm able to make myself.
Again, maybe I guess it would work as everything else works. You write an adapter for it. Again, your OLT doesn't work with the rGRPC protobuf OpenOLT models. You write an adapter for it. Your OLT doesn't have syslog capabilities. You get the logs however you want and then export them to syslog. And so I would expect that to be okay. I guess.
Okay.
I mean, it's probably not going to be easy for them, but on the flip side, syslog, at least in my opinion, is a fairly well-known thing and well-adopted thing.
Yeah, I think for most Linux systems, I think anyways, the support for logs through syslog definitely needs to be there, because some of the operating system level logs would be anyways going there. It won't be going to anything else. So I think this is needed in any case, I would guess.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, makes sense, thanks.
Okay, I'll summarize this. I'll create a proposal. We can discuss it next week. And if everybody agrees, we'll bring it up to TST the week after. In order to make sure we are aligned on what the device management does and what the OpenOLT takes care of. And I'll probably at the same time, if I can, schedule the discussion about the receive thing. I can bring it up in the TST and maybe Girish can chime in there too. I'll catch two birds with one stone and bring both of them up in the TST. Okay. Anything else before we close for the day? No? Okay, then if not, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for the great discussion as usual. That was great. Thanks for participating. Happy 4th of July for you, David, and the folks in the United States.
Thank you.
And have a good weekend, everybody else. I'll talk to you next week. Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks very
Bye,
much.
everyone. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.